I didn't realize how fragile my reality was until I heard another woman casually say his name out loud. Not my name, the name he made me use in bed. It happened in an office hallway, under fluorescent lights, in the middle of an ordinary weekday afternoon. No dramatic music, no warning signs, no cinematic buildup. Just a handshake, a smile, and four words that detonated everything I thought I understood about my relationship. Robert Walsh, Senior VP of Marketing. The moment froze in my chest like ice, because Robert Walsh wasn't just a name. It was the name my girlfriend, Sarah, had insisted I use during our romantic weekend getaways. The name she whispered when she wanted me to touch her differently. The name that unlocked a version of her I never got to meet in real life. And now that name belonged to her boss, a real man, standing 3 feet away from me. I remember the exact sensation, my palm going numb as I shook his hand, my ears ringing, my brain scrambling to catch up with what my body already knew. I glanced at Sarah. She wouldn't look at me. Her face had drained of color, and suddenly every trip, every hotel room, every whispered request snapped into place with horrifying clarity. For months, I thought our getaways were about adventure, about fantasy, about keeping things exciting. But standing there, watching her avoid my eyes while her boss smiled politely, I realized something far worse. I wasn't part of a game. I was a replacement, a stand-in, a body she used to reenact something she couldn't have anymore. And in that moment, the question that shattered me wasn't, is she cheating? It was this. Why was the most intimate version of her only available to someone who wasn't real, someone who shared the name of a man she actually wanted? I drove her home in silence that day. She didn't explain. She didn't apologize. She didn't even try. And that's when I understood this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a lie that had been living in my bed for months, wearing my face. Before everything unraveled, before that hallway and that name burned themselves into my memory, my life with Sarah had felt easy. Not perfect, but warm, familiar. The kind of relationship people describe as comfortable and mean it as a compliment. My name is Emily Carter, and I was 28 years old when I met her. We were introduced at a backyard barbecue through mutual friends, one of those late summer afternoons where the air smells like grilled food and sunscreen, and conversations drift lazily between lawn chairs. I remember noticing her laugh first. It wasn't loud or attention-seeking. It slipped out unexpectedly, like she hadn't meant to reveal it. We started talking about hiking trails, then true crime documentaries, then which streaming platform had the worst user interface. By the time the sun set, I already felt like I'd known her longer than a few hours. Sarah was 26 then. She worked as an administrative assistant at a marketing agency downtown. She was organized, polished, always had her nails done neatly, and her calendar color-coded. I worked in IT for a mid-sized company, less polished, more practical. We balanced each other. For the first 6 months, everything unfolded naturally. We texted constantly. We cooked together in my apartment, burned pasta, under-seasoned chicken, laughed about it anyway. She would sit on the counter while I chopped vegetables, swinging her legs and telling me stories about office drama I barely understood but listened to anyway. There was affection, consistency, safety. And then we started the trips. It began almost accidentally. One weekend, we decided to drive a few hours out of town just to get away. We booked a hotel last minute, nothing extravagant, but something about sleeping somewhere unfamiliar shifted the energy between us. It felt like stepping outside our routines. So we did it again and again. Soon, it became our tradition. Once a month, a city within 4 hours' drive, the nicest hotel room we could reasonably afford. These weekends became sacred territory. No work emails, no laundry waiting at home, just us. I remember one trip to Lakeview especially clearly. Our room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. At sunset, the entire lake turned gold. We ordered room service, drank wine, sat on the balcony, wrapped in hotel robes, talking about nothing and everything. Those nights felt different, more intense, more passionate. I told myself that was normal, that novelty does that to people. At home, our intimacy was gentle, predictable, loving, but reserved. On trips, something in Sarah would unlock. She would touch me differently, speak differently, want things she never wanted at home. At first, I didn't question it. I thought maybe she just needed the escape. Maybe the fantasy helped her relax. It wasn't until about 4 months ago that she asked for something new. We were planning another getaway when she said, almost casually, What if we use different names on trips? I laughed at first, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. She said it would make things more exciting, that pretending to be different people could help us fully disconnect from everyday life. I hesitated, but I loved her. I wanted to make her happy, and it didn't feel dangerous. It felt playful. Then she gave me the name, Robert Walsh. I asked why that one. She shrugged. It just sounds sophisticated. That was it. No story, no explanation. I accepted it. I didn't know then that names can carry ghosts, and I had no idea that every time she whispered it, she wasn't imagining me at all. At first, I tried to treat Robert Walsh like a costume, something we put on for the weekend and took off before we drove home, like hotel key cards and wrinkled receipts tucked into my purse. But costumes leave lint behind. They cling. They change how you walk. And after the second trip, where I became Robert, I started noticing the difference in Sarah, the way you notice a sudden draft in a room you thought was sealed. The first time she said the name, it was soft, almost shy. We were in a boutique hotel outside a small city, rain tapping the windows, the room lit by a single lamp that made everything look warmer than it was. She leaned in close, her mouth near my ear, and whispered, "Call yourself Robert tonight." I laughed nervously. "This is really happening?" She smiled like it was nothing. "Just try." So I did. And the moment I did, her whole body changed, shoulders loosening, eyes sharpening, a confidence sliding into her like she'd been waiting for permission. Later, when we were tangled in sheets that smelled like detergent and expensive perfume, she said it again, more urgent. "Robert!" Her voice wasn't the same voice she used when she said my real name. At home, Sarah was affectionate but measured. On trips, when I was Robert, she became fearless, bold in ways I hadn't even known she wanted. I told myself it was the vacation effect, but after the third trip, the contrast got too loud to ignore. Back home, in my apartment, we'd fall into our normal rhythm. Dinner, a show, kissing that stayed gentle, intimacy that was fine, sweet, familiar. And then a month later, in a hotel room, she'd become someone else again. One night, after we returned from a weekend away, I brought it up carefully. I didn't want to accuse her. I just wanted to understand. We were in my kitchen, the light over the stove humming faintly. She was washing a wine glass, and I watched the way her hands moved, precise, controlled. I said, "Can I ask you something without you getting mad?" Her shoulders tightened. "Depends." I forced a small laugh. "Okay, fair. I've noticed you're different on the trips." She kept rinsing the glass. "Different how?" "You open up more. You want more. And I love that," I added quickly. "I just don't get why it only happens when I swallowed. When I'm Robert. The glass stopped moving. For a second, the only sound was the water running. Then she set it down and turned toward me, expression careful, like she was stepping around something fragile. "That's the point," she said. "The point of what?" "The fantasy." Her tone sharpened slightly. "It's not real life. It's an escape." I tried to keep my voice calm. "So why can't we bring some of that into real life? Like small things. Not all of it. Just some." Sarah's jaw clenched. "Because I'm not that kind of girl in real life." I stared at her. "What does that even mean?" "It means," she said, speaking slowly like I was the one being unreasonable, "that those things are for the getaways. That's what makes them special." Special. The word landed wrong. Because it wasn't just special. It was like she was drawing a border around the version of herself I wanted most, and locking it behind a name that wasn't mine. I didn't push, not then. But the question stayed. Why was Robert worthy of her uninhibited side? But I wasn't. And it wasn't only the bedroom. On our fourth trip with the name, we were checking into a hotel, and the receptionist asked for a credit card. Sarah leaned in, playful, and murmured, "Robert will handle it." I froze, smiling too late, because it sounded practiced, like she'd said it before. Later that night, she used the name outside the bedroom again. We were ordering room service, and she giggled, "Robert, do you want dessert?" I laughed along, but my stomach tightened. It was supposed to be role play, a weekend game. So why did it feel like she needed the name the way someone needs a key to open the door they've been trying not to look at? The next morning, while she did her makeup in the bathroom mirror, I watched her reflection. She looked calm, composed, almost refreshed. And I realized something else. When we were away, she seemed lighter. But when we came home, she returned to being guarded, as if real-life Sarah was the version that had to keep everything contained. I stood behind her and said softly, "Do you still like being with me when we're not pretending?" She paused with mascara wand midair. Then she laughed, too quick. Of course I do. Why would you ask that? I wanted to believe her. So I nodded. I kissed her shoulder. I let the subject die. But inside, a small, quiet suspicion started growing, one I couldn't name yet. Not cheating. Not exactly. Something slipperier. Like I was sharing my relationship with a shadow I couldn't see. And I didn't know it yet, but I was about to meet the man who owned that shadow's name. The moment everything broke didn't happen during a fight. There was no screaming, no accusation, no dramatic confession. It happened on an ordinary weekday, one of those days that should have faded into nothing. Sarah's car was in the shop, and she'd mentioned it casually the night before while scrolling on her phone. Without thinking much about it, I offered to pick her up from work. It felt normal, supportive, the kind of thing couples do. In the 14 months we'd been together, I had never been to her office. Not because she hid it, at least not that I knew. It just never came up. Our lives ran parallel, intersecting at nights and weekends, not during office hours. Her building was a glass high-rise downtown, all steel and reflections. I parked in the visitor garage, checked my reflection in the rearview mirror out of habit, and walked inside. The lobby smelled like polished floors and coffee. I approached the reception desk and said her name. Sarah Mitchell. The receptionist smiled and told me to take the elevator to the 11th floor. As the elevator rose, my stomach fluttered. Not nerves exactly, just that faint anticipation you get when you're about to see someone you love in a different context. I wondered what she was like at work. More serious? More confident? The doors opened onto a bright, open office space. Rows of desks, muted conversations, keyboards clicking. I spotted her immediately. She looked surprised when she saw me, eyes widening just for a second before her expression smoothed out. She smiled, gathered her bag, and came toward me. "What are you doing here?" she asked lightly. "Your ride," I said. "Thought I'd be helpful." She laughed, but it sounded thin. As we walked towards the elevators, a small group of her coworkers stopped us. Introductions were made. Polite smiles exchanged. Someone joked about deadlines. It all felt harmless. Then a man approached. He was tall, well-dressed, with the relaxed confidence of someone who belonged exactly where he was. One of the coworkers waved him over. "Hey, Rob, come meet Sarah's girlfriend." My chest tightened. "Rob." He stepped closer and extended his hand. "Robert Walsh, Senior VP of Marketing. Nice to meet you." For a second, I swear the world tilted. My hand moved automatically, shaking his, but my mind lagged behind, scrambling, searching for meaning that suddenly made too much sense. Robert Walsh. The name echoed, loud and unmistakable. I felt heat rush to my face, then drain away completely. I looked at Sarah. She wasn't looking at me. Her gaze dropped to the floor, then flicked away anywhere but my eyes. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. Her skin had gone pale, like all the blood had been pulled out at once. The hallway buzzed with conversation, but I heard none of it. In that instant, memories slammed into me. Hotel rooms, whispered names, the way she'd transformed when I used it. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't harmless fantasy. This was real. The elevator ride down passed in silence. The doors closed, sealing us into a box of mirrored walls and suspended breath. I stared straight ahead, watching my own reflection look back at me. Too still, too calm for what was tearing through me inside. I waited for her to speak. She didn't. Not an explanation, not an apology, not even a joke to soften the blow. Outside, the city noise rushed in, grounding and cruelly normal. We walked to my car. She climbed in, buckled her seatbelt, and stared out the window. I drove. Every red light felt too long. Every green light felt wrong. Finally, I said quietly, "Do you want to explain that?" She swallowed. "Explain what?" My hands tightened on the steering wheel. "The name," I said. "Robert Walsh." She didn't answer. When we reached her place, she murmured a quick thanks, opened the door, and got out without looking back. I sat there long after she went inside, my heart pounding in my ears. Because in that hallway, under those office lights, something had shattered beyond repair. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overthinking. I had just walked straight into the truth, and it was uglier than anything I'd prepared myself for. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the handshake over and over again, like a glitching video that refused to end. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it again. Robert Walsh, spoken so easily, so casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. My body felt hollow, like something vital had been scooped out and replaced with static. I kept picking up my phone, then putting it down. What was I supposed to say? "Why did you make me pretend to be your boss in bed? How long have you been imagining him instead of me? Was any of it real? None of the questions felt survivable. By morning, my thoughts had turned sharp and relentless. I replayed our trips with a new, cruel clarity. Moments I once thought were playful now felt staged. The insistence on specific hotels, the way she corrected me if I said my real name by accident, the night she laughed and said, "No, say it the right way." I'd laughed too. That realization hurt more than the betrayal itself. At work, I was useless. I stared at my screen, reread the same email 5 times without absorbing a word. Every vibration of my phone sent a spike of adrenaline through me. She texted me around noon. "Did you get home okay last night?" The normalcy of it made my hands shake. I didn't reply. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't trust myself to speak without either breaking down or saying something I couldn't take back. 2 days passed like that. We texted about nothing, groceries, a show we were halfway through. She asked if I wanted to plan our next trip. That message finally snapped something inside me. I realized she was hoping this would blow over, that silence would smooth the edges, that I'd let it go. I couldn't. So on Saturday morning, I asked her to come over for breakfast. I told myself I needed answers, not to fix us, but to understand what I'd been living inside for the past 4 months. I made her favorite French toast, sliced berries, warmed the syrup. By the time she arrived, the food had gone cold. She stepped into my apartment and stopped short, sensing immediately that something was wrong. The TV was off. My phone lay face down on the table. I hadn't touched the plates. Without sitting down, I said, "I met Robert Walsh." She froze. For a moment, she tried to pretend she didn't understand. Mumbled something about him being her boss, reached for the coffee pot like muscle memory would save her. Her hands trembled. She wouldn't look at me. I spoke calmly, too calmly. I explained how the past 4 months looked now, the names, the trips, the version of her that only existed when I wasn't myself. As I talked, something in her cracked. She broke down into sobs, loud, uncontrolled, gasping for air. Mascara streaked down her face. She kept repeating, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry," like if she said it enough times, it would undo everything. I waited. When she finally slowed, I said something I hadn't planned to say, but needed to. "I want to forgive you," I told her quietly. "Not for you, for me. I don't want to carry this anger forever." Her head snapped up, hope flaring in her eyes. She misunderstood. She started talking fast, about rebuilding trust, about therapy, about how we could start over if we were patient. That's when I interrupted her. "This isn't about fixing us," I said. "We're done." The words felt heavy but solid, like the first true thing I'd said in days. Her crying stopped instantly. The shift was jarring, like watching a switch flip. The softness drained out of her face, replaced by desperation, then something harder. She grabbed my hands, pleaded, promised change. When that didn't work, she attacked. She called me names, criticized my body, my job, my future. Each insult thrown like a hook meant to drag me back into the fight. And when that still didn't move me, she told the truth. The real truth. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just lost a girlfriend. I'd just learned that the relationship I mourned had never actually existed. The truth didn't come out gently. It came out like a weapon. Sarah's voice changed as she spoke, steady now, almost relieved, like she'd been holding this back and finally didn't have to pretend anymore. She told me she had been sleeping with Robert Walsh for nearly 2 years. Not a recent mistake, not a moment of weakness. 2 years, long before she met me. It started, she said, at a company retreat. Too much alcohol, a room booked under someone else's name, a power imbalance she pretended didn't matter because she wanted him. What she called occasional quickly became routine. Weekly visits to his apartment. Late nights she'd explained away to friends as overtime, messages deleted, excuses perfected. And then, 4 months ago, he ended it. He met someone else, a woman his age, someone he could take seriously in public. When she said that, her mouth twisted, not in shame, but in resentment. "That's when everything changed," she said. I couldn't stop thinking about him. My stomach clenched. "And that's when the trip started," I whispered. She nodded. The hotels, the scenarios, the name. I wasn't just pretending to be someone else. I was recreating him. She told me the things she would only do with Robert were things she'd done with the real one. The words, the pacing, the control. I was a substitute body in a fantasy she refused to let go of. I don't remember sitting down, but suddenly I was in the chair, hands numb, heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might crack my ribs. She kept talking. Too much now, like the dam had broken. She said she cared about me, that I was safe, reliable, predictable. She said she needed someone who wouldn't leave her the way he did. I stared at her and realized something devastatingly simple. She hadn't chosen me. She had chosen someone who wouldn't abandon her, while she was still emotionally devoted to someone who already had. I stood up and went into my bedroom. My movements felt slow, like I was underwater. I came back with a box. Inside were the things she'd given me over the past 14 months. Birthday gifts, souvenirs from our trips, a hoodie she insisted looked better on me than on her. I set it on the table between us. "We're done," I said again. "This is over." She went quiet. Not sad. Cold. She stood, shoved the chair back, and told me I'd never find someone who would want me the way she did, that I was boring, that I should be grateful she stayed as long as she did. I didn't respond. Eventually, she left. The door closed with a soft click that felt louder than any slam. The French toast sat untouched on the table until evening, when I finally scraped it into the trash. The smell of syrup made me nauseous. The next day, I met my friends, Alex and Chris, and told them everything. Saying it out loud made it real in a way my mind had been resisting. They didn't try to fix it. They didn't minimize it. They listened. That helped more than anything. On Monday, I went back to work. That night, I found a letter slipped under my door, Sarah's handwriting on the envelope. I didn't open it. I lit a match over my kitchen sink and watched it burn to ash. Whatever explanation or apology it held didn't matter anymore. But the fallout didn't end there. Because when someone builds a relationship on lies, they don't stop lying just because you walk away. And I was about to learn how quickly someone can rewrite history when they're desperate to save their own image. The quiet that followed the breakup was worse than the confrontation. There were no messages, no apologies, no explosions, just absence. I moved through my days like I was wrapped in cotton, everything muted, dulled, slightly out of reach. My apartment, once familiar, now felt hostile. Every corner held a memory that no longer belonged to the person I thought she was. The couch where she used to curl up and steal the blanket, the kitchen counter where we planned our next getaway, the drawer where I'd kept hotel keycards like souvenirs. I couldn't sit anywhere for too long. At night, sleep came in fragments. I'd wake up with my heart racing, my mind replaying the same realization again and again. She was never really with me. The worst part wasn't that she cheated. It was that she'd turned me into someone else, used my body, my voice, my affection to relive something that had nothing to do with me. I started questioning everything. Had she ever looked at me and actually seen me? Or was I always just a safe shape she could pour someone else into? A few days later, I ran into Melissa, one of her close friends, at the grocery store. I braced myself for awkwardness, maybe even hostility. Instead, she looked uncomfortable, guilty. After some small talk, she lowered her voice and told me what Sarah had been saying. That I cheated, that I betrayed her, that she'd found messages on my laptop. An entire story, detailed, convincing, completely false. Hearing it felt like being erased twice. First from the relationship, then from the truth. I went home and sat on the floor, back against the bed, and finally let myself cry. Not loud, not dramatic. Just silent tears that soaked into my sleeves. This was the lowest point. Not anger, not rage, but the heavy, crushing understanding that the person I loved had rewritten me into a villain to protect her own lies, and people believed her. I didn't correct the story. I didn't defend myself. I was too tired. I kept thinking, if I mattered at all, she wouldn't have done this. And for a while that thought sat inside me like a verdict. The turning point didn't arrive with closure or vindication. It arrived quietly, between grocery store aisles and half-finished cups of coffee, when I finally understood that the truth didn't need my permission to exist. A few days after running into Melissa, she messaged me again. She told me she'd learned something that changed everything. At a work function, she'd met Robert Walsh's new girlfriend, a woman who spoke carefully, clearly uncomfortable when Sarah's name came up. She mentioned how tense the office had become, how boundaries had been crossed, how Sarah's presence felt heavy. That was when Melissa connected the dots. Suddenly, Sarah's stories stopped making sense. Melissa apologized for believing Sarah, for repeating the lies, for not questioning things sooner. She told me she'd started asking questions and didn't like the answers she was finding. I thanked her, but what mattered more than the apology was the shift inside me. For the first time since the hallway incident, I stopped wondering if I was crazy. Then, 2 days later, it happened. I was sitting alone at a small coffee shop near my new apartment, working on my laptop, when someone sat down across from me without asking. I looked up and froze. Robert Walsh. In person, without the distortion of fantasy or betrayal, he looked ordinary. Tired even. He said Melissa had told him about me, that he felt he owed me clarity. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to walk away. But I stayed. He told me his version, how the relationship with Sarah had never been as serious as she claimed, how he'd ended things multiple times, how her fixation had unsettled him long before she left the company. He looked genuinely disturbed when I told him she'd used his name, his habits, his preferences during our trips. That's not normal, he said quietly. I knew that. Hearing it from someone else mattered more than I wanted to admit. Before he left, he told me Sarah no longer worked at the company. Her behavior had escalated. Public confrontations, emotional scenes, refusal to accept boundaries. She'd been asked to take leave, then resigned. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. That night, for the first time, I slept without replaying her voice in my head. I realized something important. What happened wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of her inability to let go of a fantasy, even when it cost her everything. And I didn't need to be rewritten anymore. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments. Messages passed through mutual friends, secondhand updates I never asked for, pieces of a story unraveling without me needing to touch it. Sarah tried to reach out again. A new number, a short message, then another. Then silence when I didn't respond. I blocked it. A week later, she showed up at my workplace. The receptionist called back to my department, sounding uncertain. There's a woman here asking for you. She says it's urgent. When I heard Sarah's name, my chest tightened, but I didn't hesitate. I'm not available, I said. Please ask her to leave. She didn't. Instead, she raised her voice in the lobby, demanded to see me, refused to exit until security stepped in. My manager, who knew a condensed version of what I'd been dealing with, handled it quietly and professionally. I was allowed to work from home the rest of the day in case she returned. That night, my phone filled with voicemails. Sarah said she was in therapy now, that she'd been diagnosed with things that explained her behavior, that she was doing the work, that she needed to make amends. I listened to every message once, then I deleted them. A few days later, after talking it through with friends and sitting with my own boundaries, I agreed to meet her, once, in public, on my terms. 30 minutes, no arguments, no revisionist history. She arrived early, looking smaller than I remembered. Different hair, softer clothes. The confidence she used to wear like armor was gone. She talked about therapy, about insight, about growth. I listened. When she finished, I said calmly, I'm glad you're getting help, but that doesn't change anything. She argued that people deserve second chances. I told her forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation. Before leaving, I asked her the one question that still mattered to me. Why me? Her answer was honest in a way nothing else had been. Because you were safe, she said. You wouldn't leave. You wouldn't cheat. You wouldn't surprise me. I nodded. That was all I needed. After that meeting, things collapsed quickly for her. Friends pulled away when the truth surfaced. Work connections disappeared. The story she'd built to protect herself couldn't survive contact with reality. She moved to another city for a fresh start. I didn't follow. I didn't check. I didn't need to, because the consequences weren't mine to carry anymore. I kept moving forward. Life didn't reset overnight. It rebuilt itself quietly, piece by piece, habit by habit, without asking for permission from the past. I moved into my new apartment and painted the walls a color I'd never chosen before. I bought a couch that didn't remind me of anyone. I rearranged my routines until my days no longer revolved around absence. Work became a place I could focus again. I took on new projects, traveled for a conference, said yes to things without explaining myself. I started climbing at a local gym, took a cooking class on Tuesday nights, met people who knew nothing about Sarah, nothing about Robert, nothing about who I used to be when I was trying to be enough for someone else's fantasy. A few months later, I ran into Robert Walsh at an industry event. We nodded to each other across the room. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. As for Sarah, I heard she moved cities, that she was starting over. Part of me hopes she finds stability. Another part simply feels relief that her chaos no longer touches my life. The experience changed me. I pay attention now to inconsistencies, to how someone treats boundaries, to the version of themselves they offer when no one is watching. I trust more slowly. But when I do trust, it's grounded in reality, not performance, not fantasy, not someone else's unresolved longing. If there's one lesson I carry forward, it's this. You should never have to become someone else to be loved fully. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't staying to understand. It's walking away when you finally do.